Hello and welcome to the ISEAL Sustainability Podcast. In this episode, we are diving into the evidence behind sustainability systems, what's working, where the challenges still lie, and what it really takes to scale impact. I'm Cherika Hardjakusumah, your host for this episode, and I'm delighted to be joined by Vidya Rangan, ISEAL's Director of Policy and Engagement. Welcome to the podcast, Vidya. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Cherika. Good to be here.
Let's start with a quick introduction. Could you please tell us about your role?
Sure. So, my current role is as ISEAL's Director of Policy and Engagement. In this role, I oversee ISEAL's work on external policy analysis, our work with governments, with the public sector, but also some of the key work we do on partnerships and how sustainability standards and systems are working with businesses, business conveners, local governments, and so on.
Vidya, you've been working in this field for decades, and you've also played a key role in shaping both the work and also the conversation around sustainability. In the past, certification was often seen as a tick or a label on a product, but today the conversation has clearly moved far beyond that. And even these days, we often hear the phrase like beyond certification. Could you share what that actually looks like in practice today?
Beyond certification means going beyond the traditional modality of setting a standard and making sure that an entity is complied with it. Now, that entity could be a farm, it could be a factory, it could be a forestry management unit. But traditionally, the way we have been thinking about certification is just about these two steps of setting the standard and then making sure that somebody is compliant with that standard. When we say beyond certification, it means going beyond this level and working with the entire supply chain to actually analyze root causes of sustainability, taking a systems approach to driving impact, working in collaboration with producers, supply chain actors, upstream and downstream businesses, and governments. So it means really going beyond the act of simply certifying and verifying compliance to a set of standards to then driving more holistic change via the supply chain, via the market to achieve impact.
Okay, so in short, sustainability systems used to be about compliance and audits, and now they are talked about as drivers of system wide change, holistic change. But what shifted, and how does that actually work in practice?
Sure. I think the evolution of sustainability standards over the last 3 decades is one of the most important and fascinating developments in the field of market based sustainability solutions. Around 3 or 4 decades back, when standards really started emerging as a market based tool and approach to sustainability, they emerged in a context of very weak government regulations on sustainability and very poor incentives from the market to actually account for sustainability or incorporate sustainability. So there was a vacuum both in terms of private sector and market action and government regulation. And voluntary standards really emerged in that space as a tool for governance, as a tool for actually getting stakeholders to think about sustainability and supply chain impact. But I think over time, one of the most important lessons being learned is that the standard or the setting of certain criteria for what good looks like is still a very valid approach. But in order to make that approach work and to drive change at scale, just setting that framework is not enough. You need to actually be operating within the context, within the ecosystem, within the environment in which standards, supply chain actors, and these issues really manifest. So, what that has meant is the standard is still relevant, but how you are working with other supply chain actors, with businesses, with governments to understand the standard, drive uptake for it, understand what enables compliance with the standard, what is blocking leveraging the standard, these have become much more important questions than they were 3 decades back. And that has meant that standards have now evolved from just being standard setters to actually becoming sustainability systems. They're taking a systems approach to both understand an issue, but also then drive change. One very good example of explaining this evolution is, let's take sustainability issues in the realm of human rights. So, if you're taking a pure standard setting approach, you'd say, my standard or my system requires that core labor rights are maintained as part of compliance with the standard. And you'd write that into the standard and assume that whoever is meeting the standards is then fully compliant with these requirements. But over time, you realize that addressing child labor in supply chains or forced labor in supply chains is not going to be possible only by writing it into a standard. You actually need to be working with the community. You need to be working with operators. You need to be looking at what is hard to detect. You need to be looking at creating the right incentives so that forced labor and child labor does not occur within supply chains. And that's where standards have started to take on a more systemic lens. So, what does it mean to actually work at the community level to raise awareness of child labor? What does it mean to actually make sure that children are put back in schools and that infrastructure is there so that they're not employed in hazardous occupations? What does it mean to understand that poor families are not dependent on putting children into work? And this evolution is, I think, central to understanding what it takes to actually achieve and operationalize sustainability impact in supply chains.
So the systems have evolved and now also looking into issues beyond environmental performance and also issues that are often invisible but yet very critical, like child labor, for example. We've seen many businesses are advancing their sustainability efforts, but some may still see this issue as a complex, slow, but also very expensive. Does that perception still reflect the reality today? And how does ISEAL work to challenge this view?
First, on the question of complexity, is driving supply chain sustainability complex? Absolutely. It is complex. But that's because it's no easy fix for any of the sustainability challenges that we want to focus on. The question of how to address greenhouse gas emissions in hard to abate sectors, or how do you address issues like child labor and forced labor in supply chain? How do you strengthen worker voice and wages in complex transnational supply chains like apparel or jewelry? These are not simple problems to solve. And we need to appreciate that it is complex, A, because of the nature of the challenge itself, B, because of the scale of the problem. You're not talking only about one country or one jurisdiction, it's transnational. It's also complex because of the diversity of actors and stakeholders who are involved in supply chains and who all therefore need to play a role in finding a systemic solution. So, the bottom line is there are no quick fixes in sustainability. And even if there are, they will likely not be long lasting, or they will be top down and not be inclusive, which is not what we want. The question of speed, I think, is an interesting one. How much time it takes to actually drive sustainability change again depends on many factors. For example, sometimes a solution takes time because you need to find the right solution, and that needs root cause analysis rather than just looking at the symptom that is manifesting on the surface. It also takes time to adapt to changing circumstances. We operate in the real world. We don't operate in a laboratory setting where you can keep things, fixed and constant. So it takes time to actually find the right solution for the right context or sector. And finally, and probably most importantly, it really takes time to take people along to find the right solution for a given sustainability challenges. So for example, if you're talking about sustainability forestry management, you can land on solutions that only involve forestry owners and the government without any involvement of the local community. But that's not going to be sustainable in the long run. Now, coming to the question of cost, I think it's really important to understand and unpick what we mean by costs in the context of working with sustainability standards. The World Bank's latest World Development Report that was launched at the end of 2025 is called Standards for Development, and that has a useful way of thinking about costs that firms incur to comply with standards. And they identify two broad types of costs. The first category of is the costs incurred to meet a standard. This includes things like understanding the standard or purchasing it, the upgrading of facilities and processes to meet the standard, upskilling of staff, putting procedures in place. And the second category of cost is the cost incurred in demonstrating compliance with a standard. So that includes things like audits, testing, licensing, membership fees. Is meeting standards expensive? It's really important to understand what type of cost you're talking about. If you're talking about the first category of costs, now that's an expense we want businesses to make because we want these things to be improved. You want to have better processes in place. You want to be gathering the right sort of data. You want to be upskilling or training your staff, whether that's on climate change or human rights. So it's a bit short sighted to think of that as an expense because actually that's a very important cost and investment that is being made into long term sustainability outcomes. Now, the way ICL works with businesses to address these issues, we work in a few different ways. Firstly, ICL exists to convene and bring different standards working across sectors together. As a result of doing that, what we often try and do is drive cross learning, collaboration, cross recognition between schemes so that there is more learning about what's effective, there's less duplication, there's potentially more shared solutions with schemes that are working in the same sector with the same set of actors. The second way ICL supports improvements in the space is by investing in innovation. We have a long history of supporting systems, pilot new ideas, new technologies, new ways of working that can improve efficiency and reduce costs for certified entities and businesses. And finally, ICL really helps systems think about solutions systemically. So, the key message we always take to sustainability schemes we work with is what's the holistic approach here? How are you bringing all stakeholders who are involved in a sector together to actually understand the problem? What role do all actors have to play in solving this issue?
You touched on the fact that sustainability requires upfront investment, but how do you help companies see the value? If they are making this commitment, they would like to know what's in it for them short term and also over the long run.
It's really important to understand what business benefits are gained from working with sustainability standards. And to that end, ISIL did some work along with Evidencia to review evidence over the last 7 or 8 years that talks about the business benefits of working with sustainability standards. And that research provides a very interesting framework to understand both the early benefits and long term benefits that businesses may realize from working or adopting sustainability standards. In terms of early benefits, a lot of the research spoke to the operational benefits that businesses gain. So, about two-thirds of the research studies that we looked at mentioned some sort of operational benefit or the other from working with sustainability standards. So, this could be linked to how standards are used to help the business develop, to operationalize, monitor their sustainability strategies, set a framework in place for sustainability improvements, and so on. A good number of studies also found evidence on standards improving operational efficiency, risk management, particularly for producers, or leading to tangible benefits such as cost savings in some cases or reduced workplace accidents. A second really big type of early benefit that is emerging from the evidence is related to sales and marketing. So, a lot of businesses speak to how the adoption of sustainability standards have led to improved market access or price premiums. And this is much more for upstream producers. And for downstream producers, its benefits linked to sustainability consumption or a company's marketing strategy. Downstream companies also speak a lot about how sustainability standards have supported in improving procurement. So, things like reducing risks, increasing transparency, and traceability in supply chains, which are important. So that's at the level of short term or early benefits. But interestingly, there was also a lot of evidence of more long term benefits. So, what happens after 5 or 10 years after you adopt and work with a sustainability standard? And here, what's important to realize is these long term benefits are as a result of working with standards, but also likely to be influenced by external factors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, some of the most important long term benefits that the research talks about are growth in production, growth in sales or revenue, improved reputation, reduction in costs, improved profitability, and very importantly, an explicit reference to resilience. So, what's interesting is The moment you shift from looking at early benefits to long term benefits, sustainability standards are materially delivering to what every business wants in the long term: improved production, improved revenue, reduced reputational risk, reduced costs, and improved profitability, right? And of course, one of the most intangible benefits that a lot of businesses speak about in terms of working with sustainability standards is the awareness and understanding that develops within the business of core environmental and social issues that are affecting their supply chains and they want to work on. So, improved staff understanding, skills, and awareness of sustainability is one of the most important benefits from working with standards as well.
Thank you so much for bringing up Evidencia here. So, for those listening, Evidencia is an independently governed platform that shares high quality research and insights on market based sustainability action. That said, even with a growing body of evidence, standards alone are still not a silver bullet. Based on the evidence we have today, Vidya, where are sustainability systems clearly delivering results?
So, a quick note about the evidence base that we have, and then I'll talk a little bit about what the results are saying. Firstly, I think it's important to understand that in the entire domain of market based sustainability, standards are one of the most, if not the most, studied sustainability approach. And there's a few reasons for that. I think it goes back to the fact that sustainability standards are an approach which has been operational now for close to 3 decades. So, quite naturally, there's a lot of interest in understanding what has this type of approach to sustainability actually delivered in terms of real world outcomes. There's the fact that a lot of sustainability standards have consumer facing labels. These have been operational in the market for more than 3 decades. So think of fair trade or Forest Stewardship Council or Marine Stewardship Council. There's a very natural interest that academics and researchers have had in terms of what is this connection between consumer purchase and producer benefit, what's actually resulting. And finally, I think there's a lot of interest from the academic community on voluntary sustainability standards as a type of governance tool. Voluntary, but a sort of framework that governs supply chain operations and sustainability. So, standards have been the focus of academic interest for a good 3 decades, if not more now. And I think this is important to keep in mind because we have the privilege in terms of sustainability standards where a lot more evidence is available about what works, what doesn't work than there is for any other market based sustainability tool. So, now coming to what does the evidence actually say about the results that standards deliver? One of the most important findings cutting across a lot of the research is that standards as a framework for continuous improvement that helps businesses and producers in a sector understand challenges and put in place practices to drive sustainability, that instrument is still very valid. In terms of real world impacts, I think the evidence is quite clear that for many of the schemes that work in agriculture, working with sustainability standards has supported farmers in improving prices and yields from certified crops. For schemes that work on environmental issues, the evidence is quite strong that working with sustainability schemes helps deliver improved biodiversity and habitat conservation in key sectors such as forestry or palm oil. So I think the large body of evidence that we have, although there are differences across contexts, does show that even while they don't solve all problems in all supply chains at the same time, the more you work with a sustainability standard over time, the more the potential for that instrument to actually be driving real world results, but also to be acting as a framework for actors in the supply chain to come together to solve a problem.
When we talk about real life impact on the ground, the results can vary. Why might a standard work well in one country or region but struggle in another?
This is where it's really key to understand the systemic nature of sustainability issues. So, I'd like to take an example to actually bring this point to light. Let's take the example of supporting smallholder farmer livelihoods. A lot of sustainability standards have as a key goal the improvement of farmer livelihoods in whichever sector they're working in. may it be agriculture or food sectors. So let's say you are a scheme that has a standard, and you've put requirements around paying farmers a higher price for their raw material, or supporting the quality and yield for farmers so that they can earn more revenue from the sale of a product. Let's say that that's what your standard requirement is. Now, in one context, in one country where you operate, this particular standard, when it's applied at the field level, this may result in a very strong increase in farmer incomes as a result of both a higher yield and a higher price. Basically, you may be able to see that farmers are better off as a result of working with your standard because they're able to earn more. But let's say in another country, it's the very same standard, but in that country, food price inflation or the cost of food has gone up to 100%. Now, that change would negate any gains that the farmers have made through any increase in income from the better yields and prices that they have got through your standard, because all the money that they have earned, they are now having to spend on purchasing more food. So you may realize that farmers are worse off in country B as a result of the same intervention. So, if the goal is improving farmer livelihoods and overall well being, the very same standard and intervention in case A could have a positive result, and in case B could have what you call a not so positive result. And that's because the enabling conditions in which that standard is operating are very different in both these countries. So, this is what it means to actually take a systems approach where you understand the interplay between your standard, the policy context, the regional context. What role can you play as a standard? How does it interact with external and internal and regional policy? How can you bring other stakeholders along? This is where a systems approach becomes really key to driving impact. And one of the most important learnings for sustainability systems as a result of this is not to focus only on an export crop, right? So if you are a standard which is interested in driving smallholder livelihoods, you don't want to be looking only at what the farmers are able to do for that one crop, but you're taking a much more holistic livelihood strategy approach, looking at what are you doing to support them with food and subsistence farming, what are you doing to support them with exports, how are you actually having a diversified livelihood support strategy so that all the eggs are not in one export basket.
That's a great point that you mentioned about livelihoods, because it makes a nice segue to my next question, which is about inclusivity. So, how are sustainability systems evolving to reach the poorest, the very poorest, and become truly inclusive?
So there's a few different angles from which to be thinking about this problem. So one is at the level of a sustainability standard or a scheme. Are you fully understanding the different categories of, let's say, producers who you are able to reach? And what are the barriers that are preventing you from reaching certain kind of marginalized actors or producers compared to others? So, if you are a credible sustainability standard, if you have good monitoring and evaluation capabilities, you should be able to fully understand the scope of who you are reaching as a result of your operations and go beyond the standard measures to actually reach those who would traditionally not be able to join the scheme. So, a good example is we were talking earlier in the conversation about the costs of certification, right? And whoever you are, there are certain costs that you would need to incur to meet the basic threshold of starting to enter a scheme or work with a scheme. Now, if you belong to a category of marginalized producers who do not even have the means to be making those basic investments, then by default, you will be left out of a sustainability scheme and any benefits that has. So, some sustainability standards and organizations have set up producer funds where they actually support marginalized producers by providing them seed funding or by absorbing some of the very basic operational costs that could be incurred in meeting the basic levels of the standard. So that's about two things. One, understanding who you reach and who you don't reach, and ensuring that your strategies are flexible enough or adaptive enough so that you can bring more people into the scope of your scheme and standard. But secondly, also ensuring that you have identified what the barriers are. Is the barrier an access to market? Is the barrier lack of finance? Is the barrier education and literacy? And the more you are able to understand what the barriers are, the better you're able to innovate with your model. I think the second important element about how do we reach marginalized producers or marginalized actors is really by not trying to work only through the instrument of the standard, but developing partnerships with field based organizations or implementation organizations who are very close to the ground reality. And sustainability standards who invest in capacity building do exactly that. They should be working with extension services, NGOs, and other organizations that are rooted in the community, that have a strong understanding of the local reality, and will be able to tell you how you need to adapt your model, your strategy, and even your standards so that it is able to be most impactful at the ground level.
After roughly 30 years, we've seen progress in methodology and also real impact on the ground, including also in business profitability and also in operations, right? So, if you could sum it up, what have we learned about what it takes to scale that impact?
Absolutely. It takes more than one organization to address a sustainability issue, because it takes more than one organization that creates the issue in the first place. So, um, fundamentally, no one organization or individual or type of entity is responsible for creating climate change. No one entity is responsible for labor rights violations. It is a very systemic problem that's been created, and therefore you need systemic solutions. I think what we've learned from ISEAL, both based on the evidence and based on the practical experience of many of our member systems, is there's a few important fundamentals that help you understand how to scale. Firstly, root cause analysis. Do you fully understand what the barrier or problem is that is resulting in a certain sustainability issue within your supply chain, within your sector? The second is, a lot of the time you can have great tools, great systems, and great processes, and nothing will change. And that's because you've not been able to create the right incentives for behavioral change. So, another very important learning that comes from evidence and research is sustainability systems need to be able to create the right incentives for all supply chain actors to play their part. A third one is, sometimes you find sustainability operating in silos. A group of people is interested in driving human rights impact. A group of people is interested in driving economic impact. A group of people focuses only on environmental or conservation goals. And in reality, that's not how the real world operates. Sustainability and development is messy. It's an interplay of social, economic, environmental, political, institutional, ethical, moral issues. And unless you understand and manage the trade offs between decisions, you will not be creating the right framework for people to actually take the decisions and make the change you want. And the fourth is adaptability. We live in an extremely dynamic world right now. Every single survey you read of sustainability leaders or global companies says that nothing is predictable anymore. So, if you really want to be scaling impact on any sustainability solution, a willingness to be adaptable both to local and regional context, but also adaptable in terms of different types of solutions or strategies to drive impact is going to be key. It goes without saying that in addition to these four dimensions, I think a willingness to work with others and collaborate is fundamentally what good sustainability and scaling solutions is about. And again, this goes to the realization that no one organization is responsible for creating the problem, and therefore no one organization can fully solve it.
Thank you so much, Vidya, for joining us today, and thank you all for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.